Did you know that a new sorcerer entered in a battle in Chapter 262? A new chapter has been released today called Chapter 262 Part 2. At the end of this chapter, it's revealed that another special grade sorcerer entered the battle. Remember, Chapter 262 came out 3 weeks ago and had only 7 pages because Gege Akutami was not feeling well. To continue that, this chapter, Chapter 262 Part 2, has been released. The Sukuna versus Yuta domain clash is still ongoing, with no clear result yet. There are a couple of flashbacks shown, and at the end of this chapter, a special grade sorcerer helps Yuta. How did someone enter the domain battle between Yuta and Sukuna? You'll find out at the end of the chapter. Let's start with JJK Chapter 262 Part 2. The chapter begins with Yuta noticing that Rika is not around Gojo's body, meaning he can't use any other techniques besides Gojo's Limitless technique. He also notices that since both of Sukuna's left hands were cut in Chapter 255, Sukuna hasn't used the world cutting slash. Yes, Sukuna opened his domain, killed Choso, and cut Yuji's legs, which Yuji healed, but he hasn't used the world cutting slash since Chapter 255. As we know, to use the world cutting slash, Sukuna has to form a specific sign with his hands. However, since he doesn't have his left hands, he can't form the sign, and therefore can't use the world cutting slash. He might still be able to use it with a binding vow, as he did when he cut Gojo. Currently, Yuta is thinking that Sukuna only has domain amplification to fight Gojo. The infinity can be overcome by what Sukuna is currently doing. He is using another technique within his domain that, logically, shouldn't be possible, but binding vows make it so. In terms of hand-to-hand combat, the scene is exactly like when Gojo fought Sukuna a long time ago. Yuta is doing the same thing here, but he is having some difficulty adjusting to Gojo's long limbs. He mentions that he received the same training, switch training. If you're wondering what switch training is, it was something Gojo and Yuta did before the original Gojo versus Sukuna battle, so they could train in each other's bodies. Yuta had issues with Gojo's body then, and he still does now. Also, Yuta says that mastering Gojo's Limitless technique cannot be done in just one quick training session. From the outside, the technique looks very flawless and powerful, but it is much more sensitive than he imagined. He now understands why the 6 eyes are needed for Limitless. Only Gojo knows the exact reason, but since Yuta is in Gojo's body, he understands it too. Yuta mentions that the technique is very sensitive and that Gojo's 6 eyes help in optimizing the use of cursed energy. So the 6 eyes are necessary to use Gojo's Limitless technique. Now, after seeing so many of Yuta's thoughts, we turn to Sukuna. Sukuna first notices that Yuta isn't using Gojo's Limitless technique properly, so he punches Yuta. Yuta blocks it, but Sukuna says, now is not the time for daydreaming. At this point, Yuta recalls one of Gojo's most famous lines. After clashing with the beast 5 times, Sukuna manages to knock Yuta down with a 1-2-3 combo, leaving him in a dire state. Sukuna then reveals that Kenjaku already told him about Yuta's curse technique, which is the ability to copy other techniques. To do this, Yuta has to feed Rika a piece of the flesh of the person whose technique he wants to copy. Sukuna also notices that right now, Rika isn't around Gojo's body, meaning Yuta can't use any other copied curse techniques from the past. Sukuna says that even if Yuta was using another copied technique, he would still be able to fight him, likely because of his extensive battle experience over the years, having seen many cursed techniques. Sukuna is familiar with about 80–90% of all techniques. Just like us, Sukuna is thinking that if Kenjaku's technique ends, Yuta will be left with only Gojo's body. Maybe Yuta hasn't thought this through. Sukuna is contemplating this because he wants to predict Yuta's next move, and he predicts it accurately. Sukuna feels that this might be Yuta's last fight, meaning Yuta will die afterward. Sukuna wonders, if Yuta knows he will die, what technique will he use? He realizes that Yuta might use a self-destruction technique, the one that combines red and blue, known as hollow purple. Before we see what happens next, there's a small flashback to their swap training. In the flashback, Gojo calls Yuta's technique inconsistent, and Maki, Panda, and Inumaki defend Yuta. Back to the battle, Yuta starts chanting for hollow purple. Chanting amplifies a cursed technique's intensity. Seeing this, Sukuna remembers the hollow purple that Gojo used to one-shot Mahito and severely injure Sukuna in Chapter 235. Sukuna won't let that happen again, so he interrupts Yuta, blocking his hand seals and punching him. Sukuna thinks that no matter what, he won't let Yuta use hollow purple. Yuta then says he understands that Sukuna won't let him use hollow purple, but he has a simple plan that will work. Yuta throws a tape recorder, which plays Inumaki's cursed speech saying English or Spanish.
Baby, you got something in your nose. Slipping that K, did you feel the hole?
Just kidding. Inumaki says, don't move. Sukuna has to follow the command for a limited time. With Sukuna frozen, Yuta completes the chant for Hollow Purple and can release it at any moment. The chapter ends here. First, Yuta will use Hollow Purple, a technique he created himself, not one he copied. This shows he has learned red and blue because he can mix them to make purple. His chanting will make it even stronger. Second, using Inumaki's cursed speech through a tape recorder might be against the rules. You could keep repeating the don't move command, but there might be a limit, like the tape recorder only working once. At the end of the chapter, the editor's comment says, unleash your teacher's ultimate technique, Hollow Purple. So, chapter 262. Part 2 ends here, and there's no break. Chapter 263 will come out on July 11th. I think Yuta will use Hollow Purple, but it might not be strong enough and could even hurt him. One Hollow Purple might not be enough to defeat Sukuna. I'm sure Sukuna will find a way to counter Inumaki's cursed technique, as he's Gege's beloved character. We'll find out in the next chapter on July 11th. Also, Gege mentioned why Yorozu couldn't heal after reincarnation, which is interesting, but I wonder why Yorozu was brought up now. Overall, the chapter was good, but didn't show much new growth. It's just a continuation of the previous chapter. Well, it's time to say goodbye. See you next time.